All right, well, let some more folks come on in. And in the meantime, I will kick us off. So, hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for joining us for our third and final session of our three-part webinar series, Understanding Trauma and Fostering Resilience when Working with Afghan Refugee Students and Their Families. Cassie and Brandon from Child Trends are here with us again to in this kind of culminating session to bring together our learning over the last few weeks. Today, the focus is to kind of sharpen your understanding of key concepts and hopefully leave with some, valuable resources and some new knowledge to take into your classrooms. So as this is our final session, we want to really encourage you to ask questions while Brandon and Cassidy are with us and really engage with our Child Trends colleagues and with one another. Either out loud today or in the chat. So please feel free to share your thoughts or share any questions you might have. And as a quick reminder, like the other two sessions in this workshop series, the evaluation link for the session, which is also the link to apply for Act 48, will be in the chat at the end of the workshop and sent out again via email. Brandon and Cassidy are kind enough to share their slides with us after each session, so you will receive those as well. And this session, like the other, are being recorded and they will be posted on the webpage as soon as they are ready to go. And so you'll have access to these workshops even after the sessions end. So thank you so much again for joining us this afternoon. And thank you again to Cassidy, Brandon, and our colleagues at Child Trends for sharing their expertise with us. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Brandon and Cassidy. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. I know it can be tricky to find time at the end of the school day to hop on a webinar, so we appreciate it. And I will also say, I'm sad that this is the end of our webinar series. You all have been really fantastic and really engaged. So I'm looking forward to another very engaged session. So feel free to share things in the chat or to raise your hand or just come off mute. Since this is our last time together, I really want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with asking whatever questions or sharing whatever thoughts you might have as we wrap this series up. So my name is Brandon Stratford. I'm the Deputy Director of Education Research at Child Trends. Many of you have probably already heard my spiel, so I'll try and make it short. But I come to this work having previously been a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. Briefly, I also worked in Seattle as a math and reading specialist, where I learned that what I really wanted to do was focus more on the social emotional aspect of what kids were dealing with and what they were bringing to school. So I got my master's in social work, and I worked in a community center, working mostly with immigrants from Latin America. Then I moved into working in schools. And then I got my PhD in public health, frankly, because the program I worked for, I was like, y'all aren't listening to us. So I need some extra letters after my name and then you'll listen. So that is how I ended up where I am. And for the past 10 years, I've gotten to focus on thinking about how schools can be safe and supportive learning spaces for youth and workplaces for staff. So that is my story, and I'll pass it over to Cassidy.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. My name is Cassidy Garos. I'm a policy analyst on the education and youth development teams at Child Trends. And likewise, I will keep my intro brief for you all, but really come to this work interested and excited about safe and supportive environments for youth and really working with educators to support that. So again, just thank you for being here on our third and final session. And we're really excited to wrap this up and to continue this work with you all. So thank you. Okay, and just briefly, I'll just give a little pitch about Child Trends. We're a national nonpartisan research organization with experts in early childhood, child welfare, healthy schools, juvenile justice, mental health, and youth development, just to name a few. This slide summarizes some of our education-focused work, but you can scan that QR code in the right-hand corner to learn a little bit more about Child Trends broadly if you'd like. Okay. And I know we were already doing some welcomes in the chat, but if you would now just take a moment to pop into the chat your name, pronouns, your role, your location, and something that you did in the past week to provide trauma-informed support to refugee students and their families. You might remember this question from last time. This could be something that you engaged in directly with the student or family, but it could also be something that you did to increase your own knowledge or to educate others around you in your school or organization. So if you'd go ahead and just welcome yourselves in the chat, I will continue on with the rest of our housekeeping items. So like we talked about, this is our third and final webinar in our three-part series. We'll quickly review what we covered during the last two sessions over the next couple of slides. But today we're going to focus on ways that schools can implement trauma-informed practices and support positive mental health for refugee students. We're going to go over the 7 components of trauma-sensitive schools and give you all a chance to reflect on classroom strategies you may be using yourselves. We'll also cover some best practices at an organizational level and have some time for you to all share things that you're seeing or wish to see in your own communities. Okay, and hopefully this looks very familiar at this point. These are the group commitments we've been working with since the first session, so I'll just go over them briefly. Commitment 1 is a reminder to encourage folks to engage, and commitment 2 is a reminder to respect the diversity within the group. We also just want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded so that others benefit from it, so just keep that in mind as you consider what you'd like to share today. And finally, I'll just draw your attention to the image at the bottom of the screen, which illustrates the key elements of a trauma-informed approach. Okay, and here are our session objectives for today and a little preview of what we'll be talking about. Today, you'll leave with an understanding of the 7 principles of trauma-sensitive schools, like I mentioned before, in addition to both classroom and school-wide strategies to create safe and healing environments for students as well as their families. Okay, now we'll quickly go over the material that we covered during the previous 2 sessions for those that may have missed it, or if you just need a refresher. We discussed that the definition of trauma is, or we went over the definition of trauma rather, that is used by SAMHSA, which is trauma is an event or series of events rather, experienced as physically or emotionally harmful that has lasting effects. We also discussed the concept of resilience and the fact that resilience is not just a characteristic that individuals have, and a supportive environment is a really key part of building up that resilience. And then we put everything that we learned together to understand how refugee youth and their families might be impacted by stressors relating to their migration experience, which is illustrated by this bucket that you see to the right of your screen. Okay, and during the last session, we focused a lot on identity development for refugee students. So research suggests that having strong ties to previous cultural identities is associated with better outcomes for immigrant and refugee youth. So refugee youth who feel integrated within their new community tend to have better outcomes. So the key here is really to help refugee students maintain positive connections with their cultural identities while also building a sense of belonging in their new community. We also covered some risk factors refugee students might experience. For example, some refugee students might have to assume some sort of adult role after their resettlement due to differing factors. And for adolescents, it can feel challenging to have their parents rely on them when their peers are working to become more independent from their parents at the same time. So one thing that schools can do to really help is make sure that translation services are always available to really avoid putting students in the place of adult roles. Likewise, refugee students might also be subject to identity-based harassment or bullying for their cultural identity, which may cause them to retract from that identity further, which can be a really important source of support that can otherwise buffer students from adversity. Okay, and we also worked with the social identity wheel on the left and the wheel of power and privilege on the right, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. The social identity wheel includes several different categories of identities, such as age, gender, and legal status, while the wheel of power and privilege illustrates the concept of intersectionality, which helps us think about ways individuals and groups might experience multiple but overlapping forms of oppression and discrimination. It's important to understand your own identity and how it may or may not afford you power and privilege. And similarly, it's important to recognize this in our work with refugee students and families, some of whom likely have very different experiences with power and privilege in the United States. And now it's time to wrap all of this understanding around trauma and identity development together and talk about how we can apply these concepts in our classrooms and schools. So I'll pass it over to Brandon, who's going to take us through some of the principles of trauma-sensitive schools.
All right, thanks, Cassidy. So for today, we are really going to focus on the 7 principles of trauma-sensitive schools. And we really hope that you will see connections to what we've already talked about in terms of understanding sources of stressor for refugee students and their families, as well as really the importance of thinking about our own identities and how our identities and experiences can influence how we engage in these 7 principles. And something that we did focus on last week that I also hope we really keep in mind is that idea of biases, and really thinking about being intentional about how we think about this, and recognizing that we all come with biases of one sort or another. It's kind of unavoidable, so it's not necessarily something to criticize about so much as it is something to be aware of in your interactions with refugee students and their families, and especially as you think about applying these 7 principles. So we can go on to the next slide, and I just want to point out a couple of resources. So these 7 principles actually form some additional resources that I hope you all will find useful. They really were developed for this trauma-sensitive schools training package that was developed by the National Center for Safe and Supportive Learning Environments. And that is a technical assistance center that's funded by the U.S. Department of Education. So I've posted here a couple of different web links, and we can pop those into the chat so you can check them out for yourself. The first one on the left is really just their kind of landing page, and it shows a number of different resources that they have. So you see there's an implementation guide. They've also got a link to something called Understanding Trauma and Its Impact. A lot of that hopefully will be familiar to you all by now, because it does focus on a lot of the things that we've been learning about. Then there is the piece on building trauma-sensitive schools, and we're going to be drawing from some of the resources from that section. And you'll see on the right-hand side 2 additional images and links. So the top one is a handout packet, and that one is nice because it really has some kind of practical things that you could take and use yourself to further your own knowledge. You could also use it if you're a part of a team and you've decided that part of what you want to do is kind of work with your team members to jointly work on growing your knowledge. Then those handouts kind of include some activities that you all could do together. At the bottom, there is an online module, and it has, I believe, like 10 different sections to it. You can go through that at your own pace. You can skip through and go to the sections that feel more relevant to you. But again, it includes a lot of great information and resources, both for your own knowledge development, and again, for those of you who feel like you want to bring your colleagues along on your learning journey. That's another nice way to not have to kind of invent some presentations or trainings yourself. You can kind of all go through this together and discuss it using those handouts. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of those before we get started on our own discussion today. And for those of you who joined us in previous sessions, you probably won't be surprised to see this slide, because you know we like Jamboards, and hopefully you all do too, because there's been some pretty good engagement with the Jamboards. And just so y'all know, we will probably be including some of the Jamboards that we have done today, and also maybe some of them that we did in previous sessions, because you all have shared some really great ideas on the Jamboard, and we don't want to keep them to ourselves. So we will make sure to include some of these Jamboards as an attachment so that you all can kind of keep the knowledge that you all are sharing with one another in these sessions. So really quickly, I will pop up the link to the Jamboard when we're going to use it. To add a sticky note, you just go to the 4th icon down that looks like a little sticky note, and then that little screen will pop up. You can type in whatever you want. Keep in mind that there is a text limit. I don't remember what it is, but if you notice that not everything is up, it's because you had you'd hit the limit. But then you can select what color you want it to be and click save, and then you can drag it around wherever you want. Up on the top where you see that purple circle, we have several different boards today. And up at the top, you'll use those arrows to click back and forth between them. So if you've got any questions, pop them into the chat, but hopefully folks are familiar enough that it will be an easy thing to use. All right, so let's jump in and get started with our first principle. And the first principle is to understand trauma and its impact. And that is what you all are doing already and what we have been doing for the past couple of sessions. So you can say you're already definitely implementing and applying this first principle of trauma-sensitive schools. But today, we want to think about not just you all, but really the fact that we want to think about what are schools where you're working and organizations where you're working, what are they doing to address this principle? Because while each of you are already taking that step to learn more, we also know that you're not the only ones who engage and interact with refugee students and their families in your schools or in your community. Students and families interact with a lot of folks, from teachers and principals to coaches and bus drivers and resource officers, janitors, even food service staff. So it's really incumbent on schools and organizations to think about all of the staff that are going to engage with students and their families and make sure that everybody has a shared vision of what trauma-sensitive schools look like and their unique role, understanding what that role is and feeling equipped to be able to do that. And that can't all be placed on individuals, though. Like I said, kudos to you all for taking that step and already educating yourselves. So really what we want to do right now is just jump right into some of the ideas that you all have seen in your own schools and communities when it comes to how are your schools or your colleagues educating themselves about trauma. As I said, kudos to you all for already being here and joining this webinar. But we really want to get a sense from you all about what are some of the examples that are happening in your own communities, so that you all can kind of inspire and spark ideas for folks in other communities. So go ahead and hop over to the Jamboard. I'm going to be silent for just a little bit to give you some time to think. One thing I do want to note, once you get there, you'll see that we already have images of 3 different sticky notes up there. One is yellow and it says student strategy. And that's because what we want to do today as we use the Jamboard to share examples is we want to try and focus specifically on different groups to make sure we've already talked about how students are important, but they're also within families. And so we want to recognize that schools also need to think about how they're supporting families and not just students, which can sometimes be hard because students are right in front of us at school every day, hopefully. But families we maybe don't see as often. So it's important for us to really think about what are the needs of families and how are we understanding them. And then finally, staff strategies. So we also want to recognize that staff also need to be taken care of, right? Organizations need to tend to the well-being of their staff. And when you're working with students and families who have a lot of stressors and a lot of needs, that can really also be challenging for staff. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I just want to recognize that we do have those 3 categories on each of our Jamboards. So again, if you're talking about a strategy that would relate to students and their needs, yellow. If it's about meeting the needs or understanding the needs of families, blue. And if it's about understanding or meeting the needs of staff, orange. If you're not sure, just pick the one that feels right. And I'm sure that you will spark an idea for someone else. All right, so I see some examples already showing up on the Jamboard. We've got parent cafes where parents can connect and support one another. We've got, for students, giving advance notice of fire drills and disruptions to the schedule. That is fantastic. We know that loud noises and emergency sort of situations can feel extra stressful for students who've experienced trauma. We've got a school-wide training series using those trauma sensitive school resources. Oh, fantastic. So some folks are already familiar with them and using them. I'm glad to hear that. Providing fidgets and brain breaks during instruction. So I do want to ask the person who noted parent cafes, or anybody who's got parent cafes happening in their school, what are you seeing happen to make sure that refugee families or families where English maybe isn't their first or most comfortable language, or other strategies beyond just language, how are schools making sure that parent cafes feel like a comfortable space for refugee and immigrant families? You can come off mute if you have an example of what your school is doing, or you can pop it into the chat.
I put that one, so I'll just quickly comment that we are parent cafes that we're actually just starting the series this coming month, but they're specific for our ELD families, the families of students within our English language development program. And we invite our community liaisons to each meeting so that at least they know that there's someone there that speaks their language. But the idea ultimately is for them really to communicate with one another and get to know each other and share resources, because we're not a neighborhood school. So we're trying to kind of create more of a sense of community between the families.
Great. And are those liaisons people who might also be working with the families outside of your parent cafes?
They do, in that they provide the majority of our translation and interpretation services for any school meetings. We also have like other family events where they come and get to know the families. But like I said, we're not a geographical like neighborhood school. People live all over the city. So yeah, it's difficult to kind of sometimes have like an actual physical community.
Can you tell
Great.
me
Yeah. Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm an ESL teacher. And so this is very intriguing to me, and I don't know the concept. How often do you have them, Sarah?
So the goal for this year is once a month.
Wow. And is it in the evening?
No, so far they've been during the day. That's what our parents have preferred. We just sent out like a poll on we use like Parent Square for parent communication, asking parents' preferences. And we happen to have a public library next door to our school that hosts a space for us.
Great, thank you. Do you have a program, did you say, at each time you have a meeting? Is there somebody who's speaking?
Oh no, I meant the families of the students in our ELD program at the school, like that are part of our
right. When you have these events, is someone presenting, or it really is a social time?
We do have usually it's based around an event. Sorry, I didn't mean to like hijack this whole session, but yeah, we usually have like an event or like a quick debriefing before parents can socialize.
Thanks very much.
Sure.
So no problem with taking over the meeting, because I think when we're sharing ideas that resonate with folks, it is important to be able to kind of make those connections. I will also say, hopefully, something that you will think about as we go through these other principles is parent cafes, for example. I bet you're going to find opportunities where parent cafes would be useful in applying a lot of these different principles. So just keep that in mind as we kind of see these examples on this first Jamboard. Some of these strategies really can be leveraged to meet a number of these different principles. And I love parent cafes are fantastic, especially because they can build that relationship, right? Because some of these topics around trauma, mental health are not a topic that you necessarily are going to bring up in a first meeting with a parent, right? Especially because different cultures might have different kind of understandings of how safe it feels to discuss these topics with someone outside of the family. So establishing these sorts of ongoing opportunities to build relationships and connections are really important to being able to get to that space where people can share what their needs are and engage in dialogue. Because we've also said many times that it's really important for us to be open and communicating with folks, because we can't make assumptions about what everybody's experiences are, even if they hold a similar identity to somebody else. That we can certainly do our own homework to try and understand some background differences, but we also need to be open to the fact that just because we know something about Afghan families doesn't mean we know something about every family, right? It doesn't apply to everyone. So it's important to build those opportunities for connection. Home visits is another fantastic one. Again, thinking about, finding ways to make sure that home visits feel comfortable for folks, and kind of building those relationships. So we are going to move on because there's going to be other opportunities to share your fantastic ideas. And I want to make sure that we get to some of these other ones, because I think sometimes just hearing about a different principle might spark a different way of thinking about some of these opportunities. So for those of you who were with us last week, you may recall we briefly touched on secondary traumatic stress, because we've been talking about our own identities and how what we bring can influence how we engage with students and families. But also it's how we experience what students and families are bringing. So here you'll see some symptoms of secondary traumatic stress, like hypervigilance, poor boundaries, avoidance, inability to empathize or numbing, addictions. So I'm not going to read everything, but we are going to pop the link into the chat again to get to this handout, because this is the handout that we had shared last week. So you can go ahead and take a look at that. But the point here is to really see if some of these things are resonating with you. And if they are, I do encourage you to go to that link, because that link is an entire handout that not only lists these different symptoms, but it also lists some self-care strategies. It also has some templates where you can kind of stop and reflect on your experiences and what works for you in terms of addressing stressors on a personal level. And I want to stress personal level because we're going to go to the next slide where I'm going to stress something else. And that something else is that while self-care is important, it's also important for organizations and schools to put supports in place to reduce stressors and connect staff to relevant resources. So I never want anyone to walk away from a presentation where I have ever talked about self-care and feel like I'm saying this is what you need to do to just put up with stressful situations. Organizations and employers need to address the stressors at your workplace. It needs to be a combination of individuals empowered to do things for themselves, but also employers and organizations thinking about what they can do. So I'm going to read really quickly this list of potential strategies. If you go to that handout, you'll see even more different categories and more supports that schools can provide to staff. But as I'm reading through these, just reflect on whether this is present in your school. And if you can, just kind of add them up and let us know in the chat. You don't have to tell us which ones unless you really want to. But if you can just think about how many of these are things your schools are doing. So schools offer an employee assistance program. Employee job descriptions and responsibilities are clearly defined. All staff members have access to regular supervision or support by administrators or peers. Staff members have access to ongoing support for managing their workload and time needed to complete tasks. Staff members are encouraged to understand their own stress reactions and take appropriate steps to develop their own self-care plans. Staff members are regularly supported in practicing their self-care strategies. Staff members are welcome to discuss concerns about the school or their jobs with administrators without negative consequences. Staff members are encouraged to take breaks, including lunch and vacation time. So sometimes there's this idea that being able to say, I've never taken a day off is like a badge of honor, but we really want to encourage folks to take days off when you need them. And the school fosters team-based support and mentoring for staff. So if you feel like your school embodies any of these strategies and you want to share what they're doing, I would encourage you to share that, because I'm sure other people would love to hear examples of what is possible in schools so that you can bring that to your own school administrators or principals, supervisors, whoever you work with, who you can kind of start sharing what supports are possible within a school setting. Employee assistance programs are often kind of related to your benefits, and they can connect you to things like mental health supports. They sometimes have what they might have, like reduced cost gym memberships as well. So if you are not aware of if you should look into whether your school district has an employee assistance program and find out what the benefits are. It's definitely something that not everybody's aware of. Not every school district is great at making sure people know about it. So definitely ask and find out if you have one. Yes, this is an area of growth for sure. So please do take a look at the handout because it has a number of other different ideas. And again, I want to make clear that we believe that it's important for individuals to feel empowered to do what they need to for their own self-care, but for folks in supervisory positions to think about what they can do to support those folks that they work with. All right, we will move on to our next principle, and I'm going to pass it over to Cassidy.
Thanks, Brandon. Okay, so the next key element that we're going to talk about really emphasizes the importance of supportive and affirming relationships between school staff, students, and families. Establishing safe, authentic, and positive relationships can be corrective and restorative to survivors of trauma and can be resilience building for everyone, in particular refugee students who may have experienced trauma. These students may be experiencing cultural adjustment, language barriers, in addition to the aftermath of migration and resettlement. Therefore, creating a supportive network built upon trust, safety, and understanding is really critical. For example, facilitating positive connections between students and other staff may be a way to connect a student who might be more shy or timid to more resources and support available to them. Acting as a bridge, in addition to modeling healthy behavior, can help facilitate positive, trusting, and respectful relationships with refugee students and their families. Furthermore, creating healthy relationships with parents can help act as a cultural bridge to provide insights into the particular needs of refugee students, facilitating a more culturally responsive educational experience. Checking in with families and figuring out how they feel and how they're accessing supports is also really critical. And now we'll move back to the Jamboard and see what strategies we might have to implement this principle. I see one already. Build a community of learners in the classroom. Yep, community building circles. We will actually be talking about that a little bit later, but yes, community building circles are wonderful. Frequent changes in group work partnerships. For sure, really trying to build out some of that peer-to-peer collaboration and understanding is always great. And yeah, I'm excited that someone mentioned community building circles. We'll definitely talk about that a little bit.
I'll say I think parent cafes are also, like I said, some of these strategies are going to be applicable for a number of different principles. And I think something that is important is being intentional and thinking about what are the benefits that you're hoping students, families, or staff will get out of something, because sometimes there's a strategy where there is potential for a benefit, but it doesn't happen if we don't do it intentionally. Yeah.
And I'll even call out what Lucinda mentioned in the chat about staff-to-staff relationships. Those are obviously also applicable here, really helpful. It's good to hear that you all feel, or some of you feel like you have a really robust program and school family to support you. That's awesome. Make an effort with parents to better understand students and families, for sure. Clubs and lunch groups for students across classes and grades to get to know each other, for sure. Grade bands can definitely be siloed. So yeah, love that idea. Every morning we have a morning meeting to allow students and teachers to get to know each other and play a quick game together at the beginning of each day. Love that. A non-academic break is always wonderful. Okay, awesome. And I'll, in the interest of time, just move us along to the next principle, but this is great. Thank you all. Okay, it's also critical to ensure students' emotional and physical safety at school, especially for refugee students who may have experienced violence and fear for their safety prior to resettlement. It's important to establish a safe physical and emotional learning environment where basic needs are met, safety measures are in place, and staff responses are consistent, predictable, and respectful. It's also important to ensure students understand how and why these systems are in place and how they keep them safe, especially with language barriers and cultural differences at play. Refugee students and their families should feel welcome into a school environment where they feel valued and connected, with language and resettlement supports readily accessible to them. Learning about trauma-informed care, as you all have been doing throughout this series, and understanding the unique stressors and experiences of refugee students can help you understand what potential warning signs of emotional or physical harm might be. So likewise, I will pop us back to the Jamboard. Advanced notice of fire drills. That was one that I was also really happy to see pop up earlier. Definitely those kinds of like loud, chaotic, sudden environments are like, not only, I know they're very confusing to me as a child. So having that be clear and expressed to families in advance is definitely great. Previewing content and discussing with kids and families what may be triggering. Definitely having that open dialogue with parents is really important, because as we'll talk about in a second, it's very possible you might not know what a potential trigger might be until it happens. So trying to communicate about that early and often is definitely important. Wait time, allow for students to respond. Yep. Create avenues for students to safely report issues, concerns, or bullying to school adults, for sure. It's really important to have those channels really knowledge, especially make sure that students know about them and are able to access them. Presence of multiple languages in the building to reinforce students. School-wide conflict resolution process, definitely for staff and for students as well.
So I want to pop in on that one because I think that is so important. And one of the reasons why is because sometimes we do have systems or we put things in place in order to create physical and emotional safety in schools, and they become kind of just the way we do things. But when you have students coming from other countries, other school systems, they may not experience what we intend to be, strategies for creating emotional and physical safety. They may be confused by them. They may not understand what's happening. So being able to kind of take time and explain to parents as well as students kind of how things go at school, and checking in to make sure if they have any questions, to help kind of explain some of the processes at school so they don't feel scary. Even kind of, I like making sure students understand how to get places in the school building if they can't read the signs necessarily. I heard a story of a student. She had recently immigrated from Afghanistan, and she was stuck in her school for half an hour because she could not figure out how to get out, where the exit was. She couldn't really communicate well with school staff. And by the time she was able to find her way out, her school bus had left. And she then had to walk home when she was pretty recently arrived to the community. So even those like basic things, if we're able to set up systems to be able to help students and their families understand what to expect, it can reduce anxiety and help them avoid those avoidable situations that will just add more stressor to their bucket.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And speaking of that, that's a good segue into our next slide, which is just not an exhaustive list, obviously, but just some common triggers and stressors that parents and students might experience, which could lead them to have a negative or potentially traumatic experience. And again, just want to note that an event doesn't have to result in trauma for it to be extremely distressing or upsetting. And it's just really important to understand the connection between behaviors and the previous experiences of trauma. And again, while I'm going through this list, please feel free to pop anything that you don't see here into the chat. And again, not an exhaustive list, but like we talked about, loud, chaotic environments, especially when violence between peers might be occurring, could not just be disruptive, but potentially triggering for refugee students or students who have experienced or witnessed violence. Like we talked about, emergency drills or the presence of like first responders might also be triggering or upsetting, like Brandon referred to, especially if the student doesn't understand the context behind the situation. And again, things that might not feel like a big deal for some students might feel even more frightening to a student who is still learning English or still might be getting used to a new classroom environment. So just trying to be mindful of that. And on the other hand, like we kind of talked about also, things that can be upsetting for all students, such as bullying and harassment, can be even more damaging for refugee students. So in cases of identity-based harassment, like we talked about, identities that had previously been sources of strength can unfortunately be used to bully and target students. Refugee students might also feel out of control or not able to communicate due to language barriers, so that may further feelings of stress. Parents similarly might have a lot of fear and anxiety surrounding what's happening in new environments, especially when there are language barriers and cultural differences. For example, in some cultures, it might not be as common for parents to be involved in their children's education, and this might lead parents to become defensive or angry. So it's important to try, again, to not make assumptions and always assume the best of intentions. Not feeling respected or heard by staff might lead to or contribute to further negative experiences for parents and guardians. And parents might react to triggers with anger, defensiveness, avoidance, or completely shutting down. So it's important to understand these behaviors as trauma responses and not misunderstand them, which again might result in further re-traumatization or negative experiences. And again, in the interest of time, I will move us to the next principle, which is view students holistically. So we really want to emphasize the importance of viewing students holistically, as in understanding the interrelated nature of emotional and physical health and academic success. The experiences of war, forced migration, and cultural dislocation that many refugee students carry with them are not confined to emotional effects. They have tangible effects on overall health. Trauma can manifest in physical health challenges such as sleep disturbances and chronic stress. By acknowledging and addressing these physical manifestations of trauma, schools can create an environment that attends to the complete well-being of the student. Refugee students might feel unique challenges in adapting to a new educational system, including new language barriers and cultural differences, and the need to navigate unfamiliar social structures. Therefore, schools should provide comprehensive support systems that go beyond just traditional academic support. This can include mental health resources, access to mental health resources, counseling services, and health education at school, and collaboration with community organizations that specialize in refugee support and can help fill in the gaps of what might not be offered at school as needed. Helping students and their families meet health needs is a critical aspect of viewing students holistically. So having language accessible service availability is also really important. By offering holistic supports, schools can empower refugee students to thrive academically while addressing emotional and physical aspects of their well-being as well. And now for the last time for my section, I'll take us to the Jamboard. Let's see what we have here. Allow students to talk about their culture, providing time for brain breaks, pause and process emotionally difficult passages that may trigger traumatic events. Totally really important to take a step back and leave room for that emotional processing and guide students through that when possible. Group meetings with counselor or other students in the same situation. Students should be given the opportunity to interact with content from numerous positions and points of view in a safe and supportive environment. Totally. And students understand a country and government are not its people. You can care about a people and disagree with the government. Absolutely. Asset-based approaches to discussing students. Absolutely. Awesome.
And I just want to re-emphasize what you said about schools connecting with other community organizations, because obviously schools are dealing with a lot already. There are a lot of needs and a lot of competing priorities. And there are also organizations sometimes within communities that can help to fill gaps and can also be really fantastic relationships for families. So schools don't always have to provide everything. Sometimes they can serve as a hub. And so the role of the school then is to be aware of what are the resources in your community and to be able to make that warm handoff, right? Like understand these organizations that you are potentially referring families to and check in with families and say, hey, how'd it go? Like, did you feel like that was a good place for me to send you? Because sometimes, we need to provide some feedback to organizations or learn what the experience was of a family or a student if we've made a referral. So we make sure that we're making connections that are supportive and positive.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. That follow through is definitely a really important element of all of this work. Great. Okay, well, Brandon, I'll pass it back to you again to take us through the other elements of trauma-sensitive schools.
So, in the interest of time, because everybody has been really fantastic at using the Jamboards, I might run through just a couple of these in a row and have you spend some time on the Jamboards, because I want to make sure, since somebody mentioned community circles, I want to make sure we get to that last part where we get to see some examples of some of these strategies and hear from other folks. So, and also I'm recognizing, as I said, a lot of these kind of principles overlap with some of the other principles. And so it might be helpful for us to just kind of get a sense of a few of them. And while I'm going through these descriptions, feel free to hop into the Jamboard and share your own examples. But we'll start here with support, choice, control, and empowerment for students, staff, and families. And I will just say that in terms of trauma, this is really one of the things that can be helpful in helping to take back some control, right? Because many times part of the traumatic experience has been feeling out of control when it comes to whatever it is that has happened. Particularly for refugee families where it wasn't necessarily their planned choice to leave, but they may have felt compelled to leave. And for many Afghan families, it was also a pretty quick kind of process that happened. So being able to find opportunities to give students and families back that sense of having control, getting to make choices, is really critical. And that doesn't just come with finding kind of opportunities for kids to pick, do you want to do it this way or that way? But it also includes things like social and emotional skills and language skills, because all of those skills equip students with what they need in order to be able to go out and make connections and friendships. So that is actually a way where they can have some choice and control, is when they feel like they're equipped to be able to engage in those positive social supports. Next slide is striving for cultural competence. Hopefully that is something that we have kind of held front and center throughout this series, because again, a lot of these principles related to trauma-sensitive schools, they are not unique to working with refugee students and families. These are kind of broad principles, but it's really in the way that you apply them, and the way that you are thinking and trying to understand, how can I meet the needs of the refugee students and families I'm working with? That is where cultural competence comes in, because it's going to be different for different families in different situations. And so it's important to, again, build those relationships so you can learn what are the preferences, what are the needs of the students and families you work with. Finally, use a collaborative approach. So trauma-sensitive schools use a collaborative approach with students, families, and staff. And that really means sharing power and decision-making. And one of the kind of more tangible ways that that can happen is the way that we engage with families, right? So often families might experience schools as coming to them when there's a problem and coming to tell them what the problem is, and maybe sometimes coming to tell them what they should do about the problem. And so being able to take a collaborative approach to education and start before there is a problem, and just kind of work and establish this relationship from the beginning, where you're working with families and finding ways to connect with them before you think there is an issue, and just get to know what their preferences are, get to know, like, what do you know that your student really enjoys about school or finds challenging, so that you can start from a collaboration point where you're all just on the same team working to support the student and their family, as opposed to waiting for those moments where you need to come and really address a problem. It's much easier to do that when you've already established the fact that you are there to work as a team with them and not there to blame them or to point out the problems that their family might have. And I'm going to pop in just to see how our Jamboard is going. Cultural competence, having culture night for families. Yes, I love that idea. I know there's, I think in a presentation or workshop that we had shared in the past, there was also a school that they kind of had family nights where families could prepare food and bring it. And in some cases, they kind of brought it and sold it. And then those funds went into a pot that was used to help support other kind of events for families. So it was kind of an opportunity for families to share their culture, but also to contribute to something by being able to help raise funds through sharing food. So I'll pause while folks share a couple of more, and I'm going to actually pause to see if anybody has an example that they would like to come off mute and share. And this could be from any of these principles at this point, where we've kind of been through several. And so I just want to give pause to see if anybody has a specific example that you would like to share with the rest of us. Okay, well, I see lots of examples getting shared in the Jamboard, so we'll keep on moving. And I just want to point out something that we had already talked about. So this I learned from a colleague of mine. You might have heard the kill two birds with one stone, but this one is catching two birds with one seed. So a little less violence in there. But it's the idea that you can do something again, and it can have multiple benefits. So one of the things to think about is it can feel a little daunting to see 7 different principles that you have to have in mind, and kind of how am I going to find time to add 7 new things into what I'm already doing. And it's really important to keep in mind that there are strategies that can cover multiple of these principles. So again, it's that intentionality of recognizing, okay, parent cafes, how are we going to make sure that what we're doing in a parent cafe is addressing or informed by cultural competence, is giving empowerment to parents, is promoting emotional and physical safety. So you can see that there are things that if you thought about all of these principles within one strategy, that strategy will probably be even more effective than it would have been if you only had in mind one specific aspect of the principles of trauma-sensitive schools. So what we're going to do next is really take a look at 2 different examples of strategies that you might use in your school. And what I want you to think about as we're watching this video is, which of the principles does this strategy embody or could embody? So I'll take a pause here and let y'all watch the video.
In a community building circle, we bring students and staff together in a circle and provide prompts to encourage them to learn more about each other. The idea is to make deeper connections with one another so that in the future, if a conflict does arise, we use the connections that we've made to solve the problem.
It gives students an opportunity to have a voice, and it gives insight to the teacher and to other students about the human behind the student.
Community building circles are basically when your peers and your classmates all group up in a circle and talk about certain things like what school you're going to, certain details like what your favorite color is, how you felt in general about the year.
Doing community building circles, you're really working on teaching them kindness, empathy, even like some leadership skills. So through the work of keeping this community building circle, you're teaching them life skills and actually working on their social emotional learning as well.
If you're not involved in like the circles, then like you're kind of like a stranger, like no one really knows much about you. You're just there. But like when they know about you, it makes it easier to work with you because now you're not a stranger. Like you're more like a friend.
I got to learn that I shouldn't be as shy as I usually am, and I can be more outgoing. I'm more outgoing than I used to be.
It really is something very new and different, and even the most hesitant teachers and staff members who started in this process have seen the fruits of it.
I would say because of community building circles, more of our teachers feel a deeper connection with their classrooms than just being the deliverer of academic instruction. They have a personal connection with their students.
Because of community building circles, students have really learned to accept one another, and it has allowed teachers to understand students in ways that they probably would have never understood them when just teaching academics.
All right, so here are our 7 principles of trauma-sensitive schools. So I would love for everyone to take a moment and think about which of these principles do you see or did you see or hear manifest in community circles. Some of you have experience with community circles, so you might be able to speak from personal experience. Which of these principles do you feel like that strategy can apply to? Okay, definitely 2. We're seeing a couple of folks saying 2. because it helps to build those relationships. Also see some for viewing students holistically, because you can learn more about the kind of various interests that they might have. All right, so basically, if we add everybody's up, I would say, depending on your intentionality of applying this strategy, you can probably cover all of these principles in a strategy like community circles. I see Lucinda has her hand up. Go ahead.
I just want to say, like, I teach a newcomer program for students who are learning English in middle school, and they're new to the United States. Lots of them are refugees, and we do a morning circle every morning, which is the same like the video that you shared. And many students, when they reflect on what they like about our classroom, it's the simple thing of every morning we say good morning in a circle. And that like seems like so small, but for students to feel safe and feel connected, just that saying good morning to everyone, that everyone is going to say good morning to them and they're going to say good morning is like, seems small, but is really, really, really huge. So I just wanted to share that. Community circles are awesome. We do it every morning and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and it's such a small investment in time, right? To get such a big benefit. Do you have thoughts on particular things that you've had to think about how do I do a community circle when not all students are comfortable with English or learning English? Like what are some things you've had to think about in order to do that in a safe way?
So our components of the morning circle are greeting and a share and a game. So the share is obviously the trickiest. And so in the very beginning, I'll do shares that are nonverbal or like, you know, a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling? Or how much do you like this or that? But I also give students time before the circle to know what the question's going to be. And they have a little morning packet where they write down their answer to the question so that they're ready, like with sentence starters. Yep. Like they're ready to come in the circle. So they're not like having to think of their answer right off the, you know, in the circle. That if it's a question, especially that we haven't like talked about the content, that they have time to practice and like translate or talk with someone beforehand. And then they come to the circle. Some of them will bring their paper and that's okay. Or some of them just need that time to like think beforehand. Also, greetings can be really nonverbal, you know, just fist bump or practicing each other's home languages, and games. There's lots of games out there that are pretty much nonverbal, especially I use in the beginning of the year. So thanks for asking.
Those are fantastic tips. And I would say that even for folks who are just in general education classrooms, consider applying some of those same strategies, because if you just have 1 or 2 students who feel uncomfortable, then they're not going to get the benefit, and singling them out can also feel challenging. But applying some of these strategies that are just going to be universal to everyone in your class when you do these circles can help reduce some of that anxiety of being the one who doesn't, you know, isn't prepared to be able to say something. You know, you as the adult thinking up front how you can create that emotional safety for this so that it can become that connection building benefit to students is really critical. And it's that aspect of intentionality and thinking about what you're doing and not just saying, all right, I'm going to do community circles, but thinking about how am I going to do community circles in a way that represents these 7 principles for my students who may have experienced trauma, who may not be comfortable with English, who may be confused about what this community circle is even all about. So we are coming to the close of our time together. And I love that we're ending with fantastic ideas and actual application of not just this fancy, like nice new idea, but what does it actually take to implement this idea? And so what I want to do is ask folks to go to the Jamboard. Like I said, we're going to share the Jamboard as an attachment for folks when we send out the slides. So if you could go and just share, there's 3 questions. You don't have to do all of them. You can just pick the one that resonates most with you, but there's a personal commitment. There's a something I want to do or share with a colleague, and there's a what do I want to do to further my learning. So think about one of your response to one of those questions as you leave this time with us, this series. Hopefully you've learned some things. I definitely have learned some things from you all. And I love reading the Jamboards after the session. I don't always get a chance to read everything while we're here, but I always read through it afterwards, and there's some fantastic ideas in there.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this series and this final session. Thank you so much to Brandon and Cassidy and to Child Trends, our colleagues at Child Trends. I put the link to the session evaluation and the Act 48 submission in the chat. Please feel free to complete that. Be sure to complete that. And I will follow up shortly with an email with the slides for today, the Jamboard link, and the link to the session evaluation again. Thank you all so much.
Also, Megan, are you going to send the recording of the last, I can't remember if that got sent out or not, of the last session, since I missed it.
The last session, session 2, and this session will be posted to our webpage shortly. That will also be in the email, how you can locate those recordings. Yep, I'll send that right out.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
And wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving. To those who celebrate, take care of yourselves.